From a young age, we've been programmed and conditioned to ignore the inner child and to parent the inner child the way that your caretaker treated you as a child. So, while some of that conditioning was super helpful, some of that conditioning has also taught you to gaslight yourself. So, integrating the inner child is first about figuring out where you're gaslighting your inner child and where you're telling your inner child that they're wrong or that they're not accepted. And then, second, we're giving that inner child that love, that acceptance that it's been lacking and that it's been asking for. Hi, my name is Lesl Cottle. You are listening to the Unlearning podcast, where we cover all things unlearning and remembering on your journey. Last week, I just got back from my first experience at Burning Man, and the majority of the takeaways from this experience were really about inner child integration. I met my inner child on so many different levels, and I experienced and embodied her on this really playful level. And I also got to meet my inner child on a really, really dark level. I'm in this chapter right now where I am being asked to love and accept all of myself. And I'm also feeling really called to talk about it as well. So I'm really excited for this episode and that you guys are listening here today. So, integrating the inner child, it's just this another thread, kind of like what we were talking about the last few weeks with unconditionally loving ourselves. Integrating the inner child is another thread of loving ourselves fully and learning how to love ourselves fully and practicing that as well. I can remember times when my inner child would be screaming in my head for attention, and I used to do this thing where I would ignore her. I literally didn't understand what she wanted. I thought my job was to be calm and cool, collected, and ignore her. And so all of this time I could observe my inner child making a scene, wanting my attention, and I did not listen. I didn't ask her what was wrong. I just ignored her. And this is just a really good example of ways that we gaslight the inner child. So over time, I've come to understand that I don't need to ignore my inner child. I have to actually listen to my inner child. And that's really what your inner child wants from you. She wants you to listen to you. They want you to hear them. They want them to be validated. And I think one of the big questions we get to ask ourselves is how did my inner child become my inner child? And I'm going to try to keep this brief because I really think it's nature versus nurture, but it's a little bit of both. And so nature, on one hand, you came into this world a very specific way. You have DNA of your ancestors in you. If you think about the egg of you, it was inside your biological mother while she was inside the womb of your grandmother. So all of that information that these two women lived through, everything that made up their stories, their trauma, their emotions, their highlights. They're really stories that are activated in your DNA. So that's one side on nature. And then on nurture, a lot of this has to do with the conditioning that you experienced as a child. So how you were taught to resolve conflict, how you were taught to deal with your emotions, how you were taught to deal with trauma. And also a lot of this has to do with the systems that we grew up in. So the school system, the conditioning that your parents received. And so we have this subconscious and conscious part of you that has picked up messages and stories from the time that you were a baby until through your teenage years. And all of this makes up this story of who your inner child is. And my personal theory is that as children, we often model how we were treated and how we perceive that we were treated. So if we perceive that we were treated poorly or ignored or to act out, like we needed to act out or manipulate in order to receive attention, a lot of times we end up treating our inner child like that. And I want to say I'm using the word perceive because we know that our parents, our caretakers, our teachers, we know that everyone is doing their best. And at the same time, a child can receive those actions in a completely different way than what the adult intended them to mean or how they intended the child to receive that. So we want to make sure that we're honoring both sides of how the inner child became the inner child. On one part, it's us, and one part, it's the conditioning. And as an adult, you have this opportunity to transform and to change the way that you treat yourself by integrating different parts of yourself, meaning you're learning how to love every part of yourself. And the inner child, of course, it just needs so much love for all forms that it is. So, for 100% of it, for its playfulness, for its creativity, for when the inner child is like a wicked little devil, also when they're sad, your inner child needs and requires to be loved and fully accepted in order for it to be integrated as part of you. So, reiterating the point that I made earlier in this episode, so many of us are gaslighting ourselves and not listening to the inner child. And all the inner child wants, all they want is to be loved and to be accepted. That is it. Loved, accepted, validated. And I know that if you've been listening to this podcast, you've heard me say this 100 times, but awareness is always the first step to any kind of shift. So if you're thinking about awareness in the realm of integrating your inner child, the first step is always listening to become aware of what the inner child is telling you. Why is the inner child acting like that? It's a moment of pause, and it's a moment of listening. And when we think about the cycle of change, it has 4 steps. So first, awareness, second, detachment, third, recalibration, and fourth is integration. So again, in this realm of integrating the inner child, when we're thinking about the cycle of change, what you're really saying is, first, I've done the work. I'm aware of what my inner child is telling me. I've listened. Second, I am willing to detach from and honor the actions, habits, stories of the past, what's got me here. And we're not ignoring it, we're honoring it. We're honoring the story that we used to have, and we're allowing ourselves to say, this isn't serving me anymore. And by saying I honor it and I know that this isn't the way that I want to go forward, that is what allows you to detach from the past actions, the past habits, and the past stories. Third, you're saying, I know what's next, and I'm willing to consciously act in these ways and actively accept these parts of myself until it becomes a habit to love this part of myself fully. I'm going to say that again. Third is, I'm willing to consciously act in these ways and actively accept these parts of myself until it becomes a habit to love this part of myself fully. And integration is just when we've practiced so much that it's become the habit. So step 1, 2, and 3, if any of these are missing for you, then you know where to start. And for me, this is a daily process right now where I can witness my inner child making herself known, and I can also witness me wanting to ignore her. And these are the moments. This is the step 3, saying, I know what's next. I'm willing to consciously act in ways to fully accept myself. Step 3 is where I pause when I can observe myself. I pause and I listen super hard, and I make this a habit every single morning, every single night, to listen to my inner child, to love her. And the practice looks like this. It's very simple. It's me in a meditative state, sitting somewhere or lying down. I have one hand on my heart, one on the belly. And out loud, I'm just saying, I love myself when, to everything that comes up, to everything that I want to push away, to everything I want to embrace. I love myself when. And I just keep going down this line of like loving myself, every part of myself, of every single thing that comes up in my mind. And through this, I'm able to show my inner child that I love her, that I see her, that I'm listening to her, that it's safe to express herself. And for me, this is a verbal affirmation and the tuning into the body where I can physically feel energy being released from my body while I'm saying these things. And for you, that practice might look a little bit different. So you have to think about, what is your integration practice? Not only is it in the moment when we're recognizing that we're ignoring the inner child, but it's also a practice of devotion and dedication to the inner child. And while mine is me meditating right now every morning and every night, acknowledging my inner child, the practice for you might look completely different. It might be listening to your inner child while you're running. It might be channel journaling. It might be writing a love letter to your inner child or to your future self. There are so many practices that you can use for integration. So find what works best for you and follow that 4-step method of integration, which is listening. Step 1, listening, becoming aware. Step 2, detaching from your old stories. Step 3, recalibrating and rediscovering a new storyline. What's going to serve you now? And then step 4, just practice until it becomes a habit. It's that conscious awareness every moment of the day, being really present with yourself. So that is it for today's episode. I love you guys so much. Wishing you a great day. Tune in Tuesdays for more yummy and soulful episodes. If you love what you're hearing and want to support the podcast, please follow and rate the podcast on Spotify and Apple to help new listeners find us. To find out more about my coaching and healing practice, head over to my website, www.leslicottle.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.